Hello everyone, welcome back to MixbusTV. David here, hope you're having a great day. This is going to be the first episode of a new series here in Los Angeles, the MixbusTV roundtable, where we will have lots of engineers, master engineer, mix engineers,
Tracking
designers, tracking engineers, and music industry people here just talking and exchanging ideas and answering your questions. So at the end of the video, make sure you comment down below. Let's start.
Welcome everybody, I'm Maad Hotep. This is the first episode on MixbusTV. It's a new series. We have a roundtable that we're going to be doing probably monthly.
Yes, I think so. Yep.
All right, and today we have Bob Horn, mix engineer, Maurer Applebaum, mastering engineer, Joe Vazzetti, tech guru, all-around super nerd, David Nazi, rock, metal.
Mix engineer, I can do a lot of genres, we can say.
Yeah, we just did an episode with him doing hip-hop.
Yeah, exactly.
Your first was...
My first platinum album was actually hip hop.
Metal dude, hip hop. That's how we do it.
Yeah.
All right. First topic. Let's try truth versus fiction.
Okay. That's Joe. I would say Joe go first.
Okay. Well, where do you want to start? There's a lot of information out there, more so than ever.
This is something that I've been talking in one of my videos.
Right.
It was about selecting your sources.
Right.
As in, internet is a good place. You know, it's good that it's there, of course. It's the way we use it, is the way people use it, that it's scary. Because, as you pointed out, you guys didn't see it, but we've been talking for like 2 hours already. What you were saying was that not everything that is on the internet is true. And you fight against it, like, I'm pretty sure often, right?
Well, for me, it's one of those things where there's a lot of people making a lot of noise.
Right.
And in relating it to audio, we've always tried to get above the noise floor. To get the maximum in signal quality before we hit distortion and so forth. So, yeah, there's a lot of information on the internet. And there's a lot of people who are talking a lot of information on the internet. A lot of it is misleading. A lot of it is misunderstanding.
Okay.
So you kind of have to figure out the best way to go about.
So for all the people watching that are not familiar with you, what you do.
Well, for me, I've had a technical background for the last well over 20 years now.
You design gear, right?
I do design gear. I do build studios from a technical side, mostly electrical engineering side of things, for electrical gear installations, gear repair. I do produce records on occasion when the stuff is right. I should say, when I feel like doing it.
Same.
Which sounds kind of lazy.
Yeah.
But I do produce records and engineer records on occasion. I've had a big engineering background for a long time, too. So I'm kind of, and Bob's kind of with me in this respect, where we were the last of, you started off at a studio and worked your way up in the hierarchy. You'll find out the best way to get into rooms was through the tech shop.
Yeah.
Because
That's
you
true.
learned so many ins and outs that way that most people didn't know.
Okay.
And that most people would just assume it worked or assumed it did this.
Question for me.
Yeah.
Do you think, as a mix and mastering engineers, and also musician or recording artist, is it a good thing to actually know at least some basic concept of how gear works?
Oh, absolutely.
Because I think, it's absolutely necessary, even for musicians, Sure. How about the performance itself? Like for a singer to have a basic understanding of what the signal flow is going to be.
Oh, yeah. No, absolutely. Because if you know how it works, even at a most basic level, you can get the most out of it. How you get proximity effect.
Yeah.
Or if you pull back a bit, how you get different sonics.
Yeah.
Basic things like that can totally change the recording.
Absolutely.
So having those kinds of, and it doesn't need to be super advanced like myself, where I'm
exactly.
pulling it apart and changing this out and putting this back together kind of thing. Just having basic knowledge like that can really enhance the recording process.
Yeah. For example, something that me and Bob, we were here recording on Hip Hop Artists a few days ago, and I used an SM7, which is a dynamic mic. Even for a singer, just to know that if you move left and right, when you have a dynamic microphone in front of you, it changes a lot more than if you have, a condenser mic. Right. Some basic concept like that is I think it's important to have, even for musicians and for mix and mastering engineer to have a basic understanding. It's okay just to tweak knobs until it sounds good. We all agree that, but because we studied before, I think Bob agrees with me.
The thing is, I think the way people learn is different than like Joe and I and you learn. We learned for a long time from teachers at school, and then when we got into studios from other engineers. And after we learn, we're still not allowed to touch. Like we might have practice time after school hours where we can fool around, but we have to learn things over and over again, and we watch it done the right way over and over again before we're allowed to go in and try it ourselves. A lot of people nowadays, if they don't go to school, or even if they go to what I would call the wrong school, they learn something really quick, and then they dive in, and the little information they have, just because of the nature of fooling around with a computer and getting something to work, it's almost half-assed. It's like they get a level that's not distorting, and they're ready to go and record, but they don't know mic technique. They don't know choosing a mic for a singer.
So you would say like having little information is,
it can be damn more
worse,
dangerous.
than not having
Absolutely.
any at all.
Absolutely.
Yeah. This is what I think.
There's so many producers, and understandably, you're trying to get on in the business. You're trying to get songs recorded. Why you want to pay $50 an hour for a good engineer, which that's about half price compared to 15 years ago.
Yeah.
I mean, guys,
we'll talk about that some
we used to make $125 an hour as a
exactly.
tracking engineer recording vocals. And now most people would be like, that's insane. Why would you pay anyone that?
Yeah.
And it's kind of hard to explain, but there's an art to it. There's watching the back of this audio signal while the producer's focusing on the performance. And so much these days, producer puts up a mic, gets a signal, starts recording, and starts thinking musically. And that's wonderful. But no one's watching the back of the technical side.
Yeah.
And we end up working with distorted vocals and
absolutely
too much proximity effect. I just mixed 2 songs. It's Christmas season. I just mixed 2 Christmas songs where they tried to imitate a choir, and they're all up on a cardioid mic like this.
Oh my God.
80 tracks of vocals this. And I hate it. It's like they needed to be 3 feet from the mic. You can still do it one person at a time.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, different spots, different places. Yeah.
You just gotta be an engineer. You gotta know what you're doing.
Of course.
It's like, and people they buy one mic, they put it in front of everything.
Yeah.
Oh, record an acoustic, cool. Put that mic on that. And just if it's in front of it, it's picking it up. It must be right. And that's not what engineering is. Guitar amp. Okay, put my same vocal mic in front of the guitar amp. Put my same vocal mic in front of a snare drum. Do a snare drum overdub.
Another thing that happens today is over-information. Some people are very qualified at their job and they do it well, but they know so much information that they're not willing to know that they don't know a lot of information because they already know a lot of information.
You don't know what you don't know, right?
So, exactly. Yeah. And what happens is there is a problem that somebody had encountered before, so he had a certain experience of seeing it before. And then when he tells the person, this is what happened, they're like, no, that can't be. I'm like, why do you think it can't be? Oh, because I've been doing this for 20 years. So
in our business, there's some people that have a status and they don't like to say, I don't know, or something. Yeah. They just rather, toss a couple of words there, and hope for the best. But then, this is why...
The trick is to know that you know nothing.
Exactly.
Because the moment you know nothing is the moment you know everything. Because one of the things I learned, and this was very, very early on, in assisting sessions, was if you didn't know it, don't say, hey, I know this, and then bumblefuck around because you're fired. The best thing and the best option was know where to find it. So if there were things about software, especially in the early days with Sound Designer 2 and like Pro Tools, when we first started venturing into those areas of recording and stuff like that, if you didn't know the answer, the best thing to say was, hey, I don't know it.
Okay.
But I know where to find it.
Of course.
And you were more thought of as being like the badass motherfucker.
It's true.
Because you knew where to find the information quickly.
It's true.
And you didn't hold things up versus, oh yeah, I know what I'm doing, and then fuck everything up.
Yeah.
And I had enough times where people were like, yeah, I know what I'm doing. And it's like, well, then why is the vocal track missing like a section? Oh, because it was in the trash and you erased the trash.
Yeah.
Why was it in the trash to begin with?
Yeah.
You know, things like that. Well, I know what I'm doing.
So what one of the false truth that is online in your field? If you have to demystify one myth,
Well,
and I will ask the same.
okay.
to
Well,
all of you.
it's hard to like pinpoint to one thing because there's stuff that some people in my field will hold as being like false or incorrect information that other people will say is correct information. Like we've had this discussion back and forth a few times concerning power cables.
Right.
You know,
Oh,
and there's
he's
some
also-
people.
He also knows that.
You know, and there are people who, I've been at this 30 years, I've been at this 40 years, there's no way a power cable makes a bit of difference on the sound of an object, whatever,
Okay.
power amplifier, etc. There's other people who, like myself, will sit there and go, it can, you know, because there's a possibility of it doing things because the way the science works out. And then there's people like Mayor who sit there and say, yes, absolutely, because I've heard it.
I like your take.
Now, for
Yeah.
me, I can't argue with what Mayor hears. If he hears a perceived change in sound,
Yeah.
he hears it.
Yeah.
But it's such a hot button topic. You want to get into an argument quickly with engineers? Tell them that you have a power cable that sounds better than other power cables.
This is why we're here.
And read the room and watch what happens. And some guys will get so adamant because I've been doing this for so long. I know what's going on in the world and blah, 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 blah. And there's people like Mayor who can be just as adamant saying, yes, this is a change. Yes, I hear it. Yes, it's better. Better's a perception.
Yeah.
No, I didn't say better. We're not saying better. We're saying there's a change. Whether we
I agree-
like it better or not,
Well,
that's something we
that's-
decide by our own.
Well, of course, and that's the second part to it. If he hears a change that he perceives as being better, I can't argue that he hears it as better.
Absolutely, I agree. Yeah.
I can't argue that he hears a change because his ears are different than mine.
Absolutely.
Some of the things that are wrong on the internet that I see a lot. Oh, you have to use this microphone for vocals
Right.
Okay.
specifically,
Yeah.
or you have to use this compressor for this kind of things. You
It's
know,
like the Star Wars thing, like don't speak in absolutes.
Yeah. Exactly.
well, it's like one of the best vocal takes I ever got was on a Beta 52 microphone.
Nowadays, you'd see, especially in the hip hop war, like it has to cost 5,000 grand.
So take
Yeah,
what,
five
take like what
grand.
you just said. You just recorded a vocal on an SM7. Half the guys on the internet would be like, "Oh yeah, I love the SM7," and then the other guys would be like, "I tried it once, I hated it."
Yeah.
Or they won't say they tried it once. They'll say they've done it and
yeah,
they don't
yeah,
like
yeah,
it.
yeah.
Oh,
And
wait
that's
a
the
minute,
thing,
it's a
they
hip hop
weren't-
vocal. It has to be a C800G
Yeah,
because
exactly.
Dr.
Or
Dre does that,
U87, or U.
You know.
So here's the thing: they
Not
weren't
hating on
they
Dre,
weren't in
just
front
saying.
of the same singer or rapper.
Right.
They weren't in the same studio.
Yeah.
They weren't going through the same preamp, and it wasn't the same song.
And there wasn't
And
the
all
same
of that
gain
matters.
staging. Exactly. No, those are. Thank you so much.
I want to add something also. A lot of times people take information as specs written.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of things that we can claim to measure, but we don't know how to measure.
Yeah.
Of course.
You know,
We have our senses. That's
we
it.
have our
yeah.
senses, and even if we try to measure how a certain microphone sounds, or a cable, or a power cable effect, or whatever, even though we know the science, we only know some of it, and we haven't developed all the tools in the world. Just like we don't have an emotional meter.
Yeah.
Okay. So if an
Oh, it's
SM7, if you think
I
of
hope
it,
so.
if you
Yeah.
think of it,
Yeah.
maybe someone likes the way that the SM7 looks.
Yeah.
And he responds
gives-
to
yeah.
that, and it makes him sing that way.
That's-
where if he just
Absolutely,
put a, like
absolutely.
a
I don't remember
different
what
type of
singer,
mic.
but here in LA there was one female famous singer that was the mix engineer put I don't want to name the name of the brand, but a microphone that has like a Mickey Mouse shape, and she wouldn't sing
Yeah.
because
Because it
you know,
reminded
it
her
freaked,
of
it freaked her
Disneyland.
out the shape of the mic.
Yeah.
You know,
The biggest truth versus fiction is you get so many people who insist you have to have certain pieces of gear in order to be a quote unquote professional studio.
Yeah,
Or you
fuck
have
that.
to use certain microphones
Yeah, fuck
on
that.
certain instruments all the time.
yeah, no.
One of the problems with the truth versus fiction thing is you'll have two equally accomplished elite people saying the exact opposite thing, and then people take these sides and it's like a war going on.
Perception.
It is.
That's
I
why
think-
the mature thing to do. Let's say, so let's take the power cable thing.
Yeah.
So are you against it?
I'm of the belief that anything is possible.
Okay.
And
so,
I'm a bit more open-minded when it comes to those things.
So that-
because
that's
there is
cool.
no
So-
absolutes,
Same.
like you mentioned.
I actually have experienced it and heard it and had a whole room of people go, "Wow, that's amazing." So I believe in it and I have it on certain things, those expensive power
Yeah,
cables.
yeah.
But if someone tells me like, "Oh, I tried it and then it didn't work for me," like I believe you. Cool. I'm not going to argue. I'm like my experience was different, and that's okay to have that. It's like just say you should always do this in engineering is definitely not the case. It's
Absolutely.
like this is a better 2-bus compressor for you, and the way you balance your faders and the outcome when you put that compressor on, it's better for you. Not better for me.
At that moment in time,
It feels
or maybe
like,
it's better for both of us.
It
You
feels
just gotta-
like sometimes like there's the tendency of wanting to convince the other person,
Yeah.
to adopt your methods. I don't understand why, but it
because it
feels-
validates them. It's
okay,
like they're
right,
doing
yeah,
something
right.
But I wanted to add something to what you said and what you said too, because Bob was looking at a specific point where it's personal. Like when he played it to people in the room and they all heard. It could be one guy in the room coming in and not hearing, and it's not because he doesn't have good hearing. It's because he's maybe not focusing on what they're focusing, and it's okay.
Right.
But I can give you another way to look at it is when you have 2, 3, 5 professionals and they're all giving you information that is totally contradicting each other, you have to remember that everybody has a certain workflow,
Different experiences.
different experiences, and how to achieve the same result
It's totally
is
different.
totally
way.
different. Another thing that I noticed and this is something that's the internet caused this. A professional can't give you the advice that you can comprehend because he has the 30, 20, 15, whatever years he got to where he got, by him doing all these mistakes. He can give you that information. It doesn't mean that it relays the same to you, because if you just take it as written, it's like, oh, he said do this and this and this. It doesn't mean that you're going to.
But no, there are
react to
too
it the
many
same.
variables to give people presets.
Right, it's information that has to go through certain
You have to
processing.
give them tools, and they have to put the work and learn how to use them. This is
Well,
I think
the thing with presets is it worked at that moment at that time
On that
for
instrument.
that
and
instrument.
that picture, yeah.
And it's great that you can pull up. Like I don't use presets at all,
I never
and
had.
that's just because that's how I learned growing up. We didn't have them.
Yeah.
The closest thing to a preset was do the recall because we got to do a mix submission differently, or they want something different in the mix. They want changes. So you had it written down, but we never said, "Oh yeah, that's the way we did the kick drum today. Let's always do that kick drum that way."
I know.
It always changes.
Unless they're always repeating a certain workflow.
in an album.
Well, if
for
you're always in the
example,
same
when we
room
mix-
doing the same sounds with the same thing, then it's a bit more
Yeah.
with
feasible.
the drum tuned the same pitch.
Yeah, exactly.
It's like there's so many variables.
There's so many variables.
It's hard,
Like I don't even copy templates in between songs for albums when I mix albums, even if they are recorded in the same studio the same day by the same people. Yeah, I pass the session, but then
It changes.
it changes. You have to tweak it. You can't just copy the tracks.
It also changes with style. It also, musical styles. It changes
automation,
with musical formats.
everything, BPM.
Well, you look at, like, I've been fortunate enough to know a lot of audio history with different things, especially related to recording and so forth.
Yeah.
And you look at some of the older record labels that used to be around, like Stax or like Motown. Why did Stax do what Stax did? Well, like in the case of the drummer, they only had 2 mics on the drums.
Of course.
They were both ribbon mics, by the way.
Yeah.
So they'd stick one in the kick drum because, hey, we can get the kick drum that way.
Yeah.
And if we have a ribbon like this and we put the null point facing the batter head, we won't destroy the ribbon. Great.
Yeah.
So what do we do with the other microphone? Well, we'll stick it between the hi-hat and the snare drum because that way we can capture both of those things. And then from there, it's like, well, what about the ride cymbal? Oh, he doesn't play the ride cymbal because we don't have a mic to record it.
Yeah, awesome.
And they're recording the mono anyway, or they were back then. So everything evolves and changes because of style. There isn't going to be one specific. This is the thing I always use for kick drum.
This is
Sessions change.
Yeah.
Rooms change.
It makes me think about something. I'm sure you agree. Limitations is actually a good thing.
In some cases.
Especially nowadays, because like everyone has the possibility to put 50,000 plugins on every
track count. I think track count is one of them
It's
worst things we have. Endless track counts.
Yeah.
It's awesome, and it's also so bad.
I got 100 plus tracks. Mixes.
I think that if plugins would cost the same as hardware, people would put less on the mix bus.
Yeah, definitely.
And you would sound better.
Yeah, it would not. That's the point. It would sound probably better because a lot of upcoming engineers, they just have them, and just because you can doesn't mean that you should.
Well, they
You know?
also
Well,
see.
that's what comes with experience.
Yeah,
is
exactly.
You start, like, let's equate it to, and we had this discussion before with Bluetooth, where if you equate it to doing other things, like, let's say you're cooking. If you put too many spices in your food, it tastes awful.
Yeah, exactly.
If you don't put enough spices in your food, it tastes bland. And knowing how much to put in, depending what you're making,
Yeah.
that just comes with experience.
Yeah.
And it just comes with time. So yeah, a lot of the up-and-coming engineers have all these plugins, and they'll use them on everything because they spent the money to buy these plugins.
So you
but
got.
It'll
you
take
got-
them over time
inject
before they
something.
start backing
Yeah,
off a bit,
yeah,
going, you know
yeah.
what, that's a little too much.
One thing I wanted to ask, sorry,
I'm sorry.
to Bob, to go back to the initial concept. What is one of the biggest myth that you see online for you?
Well, rather than state like a specific audio instrument type myth, the one that I think should be dispelled is that just because a mix engineer is famous or an engineer and he's done records that you love doesn't mean he's a good teacher and should be doing tutorial videos.
Right.
You know, just
Sorry, I
Exactly.
shouldn't laugh,
Being a
but-
good teacher is completely
There's-
different than like a player and you know,
Right.
a
It's like-
coach.
there's guys, there's famous guys that they're on Mix with the Masters, they're on this, and they're not good teachers.
Yeah.
They won't explain why they're doing something. That's one thing I really like about Warren Hewart's channel, the work I've done with him. He always tells me right before we film, make sure you tell why you did that with that plugin or that piece of hardware, not just that you did it.
Yeah.
You know, and
The concept behind it.
the
why you-
concepts, and not, again, not speaking in absolutes and stuff, you know. And
But why we do what we do when we, as a mix engineers, is more important than what we do, because we can probably do
Right.
the same thing with two different compressors. You know, it's what we look for
Right.
when we use a certain machine.
well, also, okay, so like Warren's Pro Mix Academy,
Yeah.
when you buy those courses, a lot of them you get the multi-tracks with it. And I had this kid email me and say that he took one of those courses that I did, took the multi-track and saved presets. So he saved my bass preset, he saved my snare preset, saved my vocal preset. And then he started using them on mixes and then emailed me asking why that didn't work.
Yeah.
And just
Why
no-
did it didn't work? Explain.
it didn't
that.
work because he didn't have the same vocal, he didn't have the same bass, he didn't have the same snare. It's like
Exactly.
even you kind of touch on it, like going from song to song on an album, you recorded drums on the same day, now you're doing song number 2,
Yeah.
but the song's in a different key. The snare drum has been tuned up a little more, the bass is playing in a higher register. The bass EQ used on song 1 now does not work on song
Yeah.
2. You know, and that's stuff that there's so much stuff missing from the internet. It's like you get these patches of information that you're not filling in the gaps like we got to assisting another engineer, being in the studio for years, having to watch. And it's like, just, man, I want to touch the knobs, but it's like I'm the assistant, I can't.
Yeah,
and during all those times, all those patches are getting filled in with information. You
And
know?
you store it, and then the day you get to touch the knobs, you have enough information,
Yeah.
enough tools at your disposal in your brain to just, you know,
But
try different
what
things.
my advice would be to people coming up that are into tutorials and getting information about what we do off the internet is don't just go for the most famous guy.
Yeah.
Read comments that people find out what courses sell the most, what people their comment. I've learned so much from this, blah blah blah.
Yeah, and now we are all on Pro
Yeah,
Mix
it's
Academy,
like-
so that's we can vouch for that source. You
Sure,
know, we are doing
sure.
that. We are doing
And I'll-
all of us.
I'll mention this engineer's name because there's nothing negative about him and his skills, and
Yeah.
he's amazing. Chris Lord Alge put out this awesome video about him mixing some drums that were recorded,
Yeah.
and he added 15 dB of high end on this
I remember
SSL.
that. I
Everyone
remember
remembers
that,
it,
yeah.
and everyone went home and tried that.
Oh
and
my
it didn't
God.
work for anybody because all of a sudden all this hi hat came through the mic when they boosted all that 15 dB. When we did,
Yeah.
his snare drum didn't have much hi hat in it. That's why
Exactly.
it worked. He did something awesome. You went home and tried it. It didn't work.
Of course.
Why didn't it work? You know, it's like that's the learning process. Not learning that he put 15 dB of high
Exactly.
end. Learning why it doesn't always work.
Yeah. And thank God. I mean, otherwise we wouldn't have a job, right?
Right.
But something that I wanted to say, I wanted to hear your opinion about it. is do you think that some mix and mastering engineer, I want to hear you both, are not good teachers simply because they have such a good ear? They compensate what they don't actually know technically. For them is second nature, and when they ask them to break down the process, what did they do? They just don't really know that.
To me, what I've seen is that they either don't give enough information,
Yeah,
or
I agree.
they don't know how. Like when I do my tutorials, if I'm explaining what I did on a bass guitar, there's a lot going on, and you can't always keep everything in mind
Right.
while you're filming. But I try to make sure that I could explain it to a year 1, year 2 engineer student.
Exactly.
We went to Berkeley.
I
It's
do
like,
the same, yeah.
like, could that kid understand what I'm talking about?
Exactly.
Like maybe he already knows how compression works, but he's got a little bit of an ear for what compression is doing. So I explain it in a way where I think he can understand. And other guys, they're just not good teachers. you know?
Yeah,
Just,
exactly. Yeah.
Do they really
What
know
about-
how?
they know what they're doing, and they
Right.
know what's good and what their taste is. They definitely know what they're doing. They just can't convey it in a
Right.
teaching manner.
At
I mean,
least,
there's guys that they can just show you what they did at
Yeah.
that moment of time on that song, and you can watch 10 of those and kind of average like, okay, well that guy did that on bass. This guy did the same thing, but a tiny bit different. And now I'm learning why those differences.
Yeah.
And then there's other people that'll be like, so this is what I did on bass. I could have done this, or I also could have done this. This is why I did it. And it's a lot more in depth. So I don't know. It's just picking the right tutorials to learn from.
Yeah, definitely. It is not easy.
A reputable person is always good. They don't have to be a megastar engineer.
Exactly. Yeah, yeah.
It's definitely becoming a fad to do tutorial videos as a mixer.
When I watch some of these tutorials, I actually have to dig in deep and try to figure out what is going on. I actually have, and you have to watch the video maybe 5-6 times and try to catch, because even when they say whatever, it just doesn't. It's like something ain't right, and like they're awesome. They're good at what they do.
But the delivery of the message is probably
That's the thing about it. Talking about conveying for understanding.
Yeah.
Regarding the educational stand, and what Bob is saying is very true. A professional can do really good, but teaching or educating is a profession by itself.
Yeah. It's a different job.
It's a different job. And now some of the professionals that educate, some of them are great also at the craft, and some of them are less great at that craft, but they're great in explaining. And one of the things I did when I came to LA is I went to a lot of lectures because I do lectures, and I wanted to see how other people give the lectures and see what it's not working for me as a listener. One of the things I noticed is that there's terms that just don't read right. Like saying, "Oh, we move the knobs till it sounds right." Well, yeah, I get that, but what is
What
right
else?
and what is wrong? Because there's no math behind what is right, what is wrong.
Yeah.
So it's very hard to actually convey what is right, what is wrong. And when I do my mastering lectures, one of the things that for me is most important is not the numbers. It's not the frequencies. They don't matter much because the frequencies they change every time. What matters is how I do my decision making. Why do I go that route and not that route? And why do I think this route is great and this route is great, but I like this one personally? So you can call it the philosophical way.
Yeah.
In the end of the day, it's not your ear, it's your brain, because you're making decisions.
Yeah, definitely.
You're saying, I like how this sounds. The ear is only a transducer. It's only
I like how, for me at least, I like how it makes me feel.
Right.
Like the mix I checked today here, yesterday, like 2 days ago, it was pretty similar. I mean, I was there, 70%. I was just listening. It didn't make me feel, okay. There was something. And if you ask me what did I do in one day, what I tweaked, I don't really know. I mean, I can figure that out looking at the session, but I didn't think about it. It's second nature. That was the point, but I've been extremely technical for like 70% of the mix. And then the last part is where you just tweak the knob until you feel right.
Right.
You know?
So in my case, it's the opposite.
Okay.
I'll go 80% emotional,
20%.
and then I'll just like the 20% will be, was I doing too much or here? So
That's-
to me, it's I put the song, I listen to it. One of the things I like to do is experiment with different gear because I feel that each gear would apply its own tone and vibe to it. And if it works, great. If it's not, maybe I don't need it. And I'm not the guy who goes by less is more or more is more. I just go with what
Whatever
works.
works.
If it needs 9 things in a row, it will 9. If it needs 7, if it needs 1, if it doesn't need
Anything.
anything. And one of the myths that we can right now say, look at it is like, one of them is, first of all, just like they say, we'll fix it in the mix. No, you don't want to fix it in the mix. You want to first get it right. And if you have to, then you fix it in the mix. Same thing with the mastering. Give me that emotional thing that you have, that you're happy with, and maybe I can extend it. If it's not there, and I have to really find a way to make it, then the expectations, they have to be
matched.
set.
Yeah.
They can't be just like, and sometimes people say, I'm not expecting that type of production, the Metallica The Black Album or, Michael Jackson Thriller. No, but, you're probably far light years away from that. So let's not even discuss that as an option, but, wherever you are, let's work with what's there and figure it out. We have to remember mastering is just the last stage. I can add what I can add, and it could make the song more engaging. It can make it more appealing. It can make it more musical or improve it or bring it to life. But we also have to remember that it's part of a big picture.
Right.
And I don't think one person can do it all. And that's why I think if you want to have the best results, get a good tracking engineer to get the good results, to bring it to a good mixing engineer who can get the great results and give it to a good mastering engineer.
Yeah.
And that way it all adds up. But don't think that, the mastering, that's where it is. No, mastering is a final step.
Yeah, exactly.
But I get to work with what I get delivered to me.
Right.
And I can take a shitty recording and make it just less shitty, but I can't turn something to gold.
Just because I own a hammer doesn't make me a carpenter.
Yeah, exactly. That's
we
one
all
big
have an
thing.
understanding of what mastering is, what mixing is, what tracking is. The point is, we all have the tools, we all understand the processes, but there's a reason you're going to go to someone like Mayor to do mastering versus going to Bob to do mastering. Not to say anything bad on Bob. No, I'm sure Bob could master a record just fine. But there's a reason you're going to pick certain people for certain things. So I own a hammer just like they do. Doesn't mean I know how to use it like they do.
That's a good point. I was actually, we talked about this in my interview with Sammy Doll, which I'm producing right now. We were saying something very similar, which is everyone who has money can buy the same shit that you have. You put a monkey behind, this desk. It's not gonna do anything. It definitely is not gonna do what Bob does. But me and Bob are behind the same desk. We are not gonna do the same.
Actually, we have a mixing monkey.
Yeah.
Starts all my mixes.
Okay. Well, he starts.
Bubbles?
I guarantee that if we do a hip hop album and Bob records it, mixes it, and masters it, me and my clients will be happy.
Oh yeah.
And it'll translate.
But here's
the thing.
movers.
I wouldn't want to master it.
Yeah.
And people ask me, like, when I get emails from indie clients and they're like, yeah, how much to mix and master? I always have this phrase. I should put it on my phone so I can copy it because I keep typing the same thing. And it's that, if you just, I'm going to ask you for the same amount of money for mastering that one of my mastering friends would charge you. Mm-hmm. So just use him because he does it for a living every day.
Yeah.
And it's a different thing than me just EQing on top of the mix.
Now, question, how much work do you really have to do if you're the one who records it and mixes it? Are all those tracks really going to be that different sonically if we were to actually put it on an LP or whatever, if we put it on a CD, are all those tracks really going to need a ton of adjustments?
They'll need less, most likely. There's certain details of where the tracks come from. Am I recording everything on a microphone from scratch and I have the time to get my favorite sound and then get it in there? If it's lots of layers over 2 days of recording, it's hard for me to get the perfect first sound without hearing the perfect 20th sound. But if it's all at once, I can kind of mix it as I'm tracking it and then there's less to do later.
If say you were able to master an album,
Okay.
but then you ended up tracking and you know that you need a different perspective, so you take a 3-month break,
Yeah.
and then when you come back, isn't that close to having you coming in
A
with
different
fresh ears
person
now?
doing it?
Well, you're coming in with fresh ears now because part of it
It's
is
not
a new
about fresh
perspective.
ears.
Okay, go ahead.
No. It's a different guy's ears.
Okay.
And that's because I can try, like I've had stuff where it's a mixtape, even for a major label album, and they just don't want to spend the money on mastering. It's 12 songs. They barely wanted to pay to mix them, but they did. And they're like, man, we could just put these out. They sound good. They're loud. And they're executives. They don't know what, they're not paying. They haven't been taught what the difference is, or they just don't care, because they can't hear it. So they want me to master it. But the thing is, let's just take the sculpting tonally. I'm not going to do what he does because he hears things different.
Yeah.
I happen to like what he hears. That's why I send clients to him. And then I have another guy that listens this way. So as I'm mixing songs, I'll be like, oh, Maor's good for this song. Alex is good for this project. Gene's good for this project. So they hear different ways. Like he's got a different mid-range than Gene Grimaldi does. Alex DeYoung has a whole different thing than either one of them. Brad Blackwood has a whole different thing than these three guys.
So it's not just different perspective.
It's not
for
a fresh
you.
perspective.
Fresh
It's
perspective.
a
A different perspective.
And it's not
okay.
like you can give me a finished mix that I did, and I'm going to go to add high end to it, and I'm probably going to approach it the same way that I was on every instrument. He's going to approach high end with different bandwidth, different gear. Like we might even know the same gear, but his is modded, my gear's not. It's going to sound different.
I think this is the most important factor in mastering, in separating mixing from mastering, which is something that today it's so confused, for people.
Oh, that's another internet myth that needs to be busted.
they call mastering what is mixing actually, and I think that the one of the biggest reason to fight and keep separating these two things is exactly that, because it doesn't matter how good you are, you need a different person to do that, different perspective,
out of the studio. Like I can spend 12 hours mixing a song in here, and I have seven monitoring situations as far as speakers, earbuds.
It's not the
all
gear,
that stuff. I have 8 now. Ampions on the wall.
Exactly.
So I have 8, and it's still going to be different in his room.
Of
and
course.
He's going to hear something just because take room modes. I have a mode at 70 hertz. I always got to be careful of it. Otherwise, this room is freaking amazing.
It
but
is.
I always got to be careful with 70 to 75 hertz.
Okay.
His room, he's got different modes, and he's going to hear problems where I don't hear problems.
Right.
So I can try 8 different sets of speakers. That same problem is going to exist. It's not going anywhere because it's a different set of speakers.
Right.
But put it in his room, all of a sudden he's like, oh, the mid-range could come up a little bit, tuck here, dip here. And
also a mastering engineer, as we mix different artists, they master
it's very
different,
in-depth. It's more than just
different
EQing.
artists.
I'm simplifying it.
Yeah, exactly.
But there's so much more to it,
Oh, yeah.
Like,
So their reference is different than ours.
right.
We they get albums to master. That's what they do.
I have a friend that I actually filmed him for Pro Mix Academy mastering a song after I mixed it.
Okay.
So it's an added part of the tutorial. And it was so crazy because he went through 6 compressor plugins and you couldn't see the needle move on any of them.
Oh my God. Yeah.
What is he doing?
Yeah.
Does that sound completely strange to you?
Isn't this?
I'm used to that now.
Is it-
Right, you
It's
can
been,
use it, but to me it's like, so why do you need all those if they're not working? They are working. They all have a sound.
Yeah.
They have other elements in their algorithms that are changing the tone and hitting them at a certain level that's affecting it. And in the end, it all adds up to a difference, sonic difference that mastering engineer likes. So there's a lot of art and voodoo that's not just grabbing an L2 and pulling it down until it's loud.
With
That's
these
not
plugins, there's no telling what's going on under the hood on some of these plugins too. But so Mar, you're the mastering engineer.
You want me to answer?
Yes, let's hear
this.
this. Yeah, I know he's slaying, but let's hear this.
Well, if you look at the big picture, I'm not dealing with details that a mixing engineer is detailing.
Yeah.
And I'm not dealing with how instruments and vocals are sitting, but I'm less detailed about the volume level between the snare and the kick or the hi-hat. I'm more of the whole picture. Like if I hear a problem, let's say room modes. Sometimes I get projects that you can hear that there's a problem in the low end of the room and it's cutting off stuff and they don't know and they're boosting low end.
Yeah, of course.
So then I know, okay, we need to back off that low end or high end.
Something that that today is like a little bit lost because there's more singles than albums. So one thing that people tend to forget when we talk mastering is one of the functions of mastering is make sure that all the tracks in one album like glue together, not just one, you know?
Yeah, you can make in an album or an EP or a compilation or or maxi single, whatever. You can make the whole album feel as a whole.
Yeah.
It's cohesive, consistency in volume levels or EQ, tonality. Sometimes you want the differences, but
I guarantee you though, 90% of mix engineers that try to master their own stuff, they're thinking, "Oh, how does my high end compare to the latest Drake song?"
Right.
They're not thinking like that.
Right.
That's the thing. Their approach isn't what mastering is. Their approach is mixing on a stereo track. That's
Right.
Right.
Well, it's the same tools. EQ is EQ.
Yeah.
How he uses EQ is different than how Bob uses EQ,
Right.
which is different than how I use EQ. Years ago, at a lecture on mastering, they took a song that was recorded and mixed by the same engineer. Great. That's how we used to do things back then.
Right.
Then they'd go off to the mastering house. And they sent the same mix to 4 different mastering engineers. And then they all played them, at the lecture.
Yeah.
They all sounded completely different.
Of course.
it's
It's
what
all
you
in the
hear.
approach. His approach is different than my approach. I know enough to be dangerous. He knows what he's doing when it comes to mastering.
Yeah.
That's the trick to it all.
I think another thing is that the perspective, and this is where it's usually lost. It's okay to say you have your tone and that's what your clients like. But it's also okay to look at it as like, can we get it better? Can we make it more than what it is? And a mastering engineer, by default, is somebody objective, unbiased, and he can bring a new perspective to the project. He never heard it
He
before.
should, at least.
He just hears it for the first time and says, oh, I think we can do that with that. And it doesn't mean it's always going to be right. It's okay to talk. It's okay to make a conversation and give input and say, I maybe like this. And one of the things that I noticed and happens a lot is a band comes to you, either a mixer or a mastering engineer or whatever, and says, we want it to sound like this record.
Right.
But they don't sound good when they sound like that record because it just doesn't fit them. Like, I'll get a band saying to me, we like this artist. Great.
I always
He's
say
a good
to-
artist,
I always say
but
to-
it doesn't mean you need to
I
sound
always
like
say
that.
to people, don't hire me if you want to sound like anybody else,
I had times where a client would say, I like this band. Great, I like them
But
too.
that's a reference.
But it doesn't sound like what you're going
It's just
to.
a general direction, I sometimes I'm sure.
But the key is the person asking.
Yeah.
They know
They want it to be a general direction.
Yeah.
Fine. But so what he's saying is so much of the time it's like it's an exact direction.
Exactly.
that they want.
That's the crazy part. If it's a general direction, is
not gonna
okay.
happen.
But
But even
if it's
general-
not just that,
But even general, sometimes you just like a sound of a band.
Yeah,
It doesn't mean
exactly.
your band sounds like
No,
that.
no, absolutely
just
not.
because you like certain low end doesn't mean the low end in your sound
absolutely
fits.
no. I wish it was that easy,
I
right?
had a client. I just can't tell his name because I'm going to talk bad about him.
Oh, we know.
But it was just a mistake because of his lack of knowledge. But he really liked this one Sheryl Crow album.
Okay.
So you hired the drummer, the bass player, the guitar player that all did the basics for the Sheryl Crow. He hired the tracking engineer. He went to the same studio and then brought it to beat and mix. And his first thing was, well, I hired all these guys because I like the Sheryl Crow album, and so far it's not sounding like the Sheryl Crow album, so I'm hoping you can do it in the mix. And
How?
I was
Are
like,
you Sheryl Crow?
You're not. It's not those songs.
Yeah, those arrangements.
It's 2 years later. All those musicians have their own musical mind that has
course.
changed 2 years later. It's like the tracking engineer has changed what he's been
The
doing. last few
songwriting,
years.
the arrangement, the mood,
Everything,
everything.
But it's like some people just think that they can recreate something.
You can transfer like a block.
It's
you know,
not
that
that
work.
simple.
Yeah.
It's like
just-
magic.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You know, you created something, and it was because of everything. It's circumstantial.
Yeah.
That thing, and now to replicate it, it's going to be very hard.
It's going to be pretty much
especially
impossible.
Oh, yeah.
In the different
Pretty
time
much impossible.
and equipment. And I know people say it's not the gear, it's the ear, but there's a reason why we choose certain gear to
Of
work
course.
with. People tell me, oh, you know, you can do everything with just these things, and you're right, I can do everything with that, but there's a decision making that I decide to do, and that involves these pieces of gear.
You know, when we grab a certain piece of gear, it's not because of the piece of gear, because we are thinking something, we are hearing something, and we achieve it through that machine.
It's an
And
interaction.
sometimes it doesn't work. We pick the wrong one, and we go to the other one.
So the myth that I
Best
was going
company
to
ever.
bring up is the young people that feel like they are missing a piece of gear
Oh my God.
just to have good mixes.
Yeah.
So one last plugin or a few plugins, then they'll finally be able to mix.
Yeah, no.
Like Manny Marroquin or whoever, Dave
Yeah.
Pensato, and they just need that last piece of gear. What is that engineer using? Because I don't have it, and that's why my mixes suck. And that's such a falsehood. You know, like
Yeah.
not trying to brag, but a guy fresh out of school versus me, I could use the stock Avid plugin and R compressor only, and outmix him.
Yeah.
It's not a plugin. Like if you have a decent EQ plugin and
The
it could be
basics, you know?
you have the basics.
Yeah.
You can mix a really
Well-
great mix. For that, it's just the fine tuning of well, this EQ has just a sweeter high end.
Exactly,
Than
exactly.
this one. Your mix is only
Because-
going to improve another
also because-
5-10%.
Yeah, because we do this for a living, so we go for the last 5%.
Most of our addiction to plug-in buying is features that the last one didn't have, or just wanting to buy something.
Yeah.
I hate to say it. I just
Well, that's
It's
you.
pretty-
or the fun
inspiration,
of working, inspiration of working
Yeah.
with a new plugin,
Yeah.
a new verb.
Yeah.
You know, something that sounds slightly different because we're so micro focused.
Yeah.
You could keep using Deverb. It sounds awesome.
Oh, yeah.
It's on hit records on lead
don't-
vocals, and a lot of young people would be like, "No one's using Deverb on a lead vocal."
We do.
Yeah, some of your favorite engineers
Yeah,
are using
we do.
Deverb on a lead
We
vocal
do, yeah.
on major records.
Yeah.
So it's that myth of like, oh well, he's got all that outboard. I haven't used my outboard in months.
Yeah, no, and
It's like, just tracking, yes, but mixing.
yeah.
I've been in the box 100%, and so have a lot of all of
That's
your
the
favorite
news.
engineers. You know,
That's the news.
I'm
It's
the
funny
only guy in
because
hardware. I'm the only guy.
it's funny because the mix
My
that I
limit's in
checked
hardware.
today, I was my first mix totally in the box.
Oh, yeah?
Because I have my rack
You have
here
your rack
at your
chain,
place and this
Right.
and the new setup, my new setup here in LA. So this was
Yeah.
like my first check.
Yeah.
And yeah, it didn't sound like shit, right?
What were you gonna say, more?
I was gonna. Well, Bob, you had something you want to say?
No, I'm just saying. Yeah, it's like it's not that whole phrase. It's not the gear. It's the ear. It's the guy
Yeah.
knowing what a record needs, knowing what a song needs. Not even a sound.
Subject to taste.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So you get an old Mackie board and some ADATs, and another guy has Pro Tools with every plugin on earth, but he's not a good mixer. The guy with the Mackie that's a good mixer is gonna do a good
Yeah.
mix.
Yeah.
Doesn't matter what gear he has.
Definitely. I agree.
What I wanted to go back to something very important. Bob not only knows his room and his gear and everything involved, he's aware to certain things that he has to be careful with them. And just the fact that you mentioned, the knot, it's
The room notes. Yeah.
the room notes. When I master his projects, I don't have problems with the low end, and it's because he's aware of the situation.
Yeah.
So I can add low end,
Right.
and not, to a certain degree, but I don't have to be like
Correction.
correctional with his mixes on the low end because he brings them in a way that he was very careful doing.
Well, I
them.
obsess about it here in this room for
Same
hours.
here.
Right.
I'm aware of my 70 hertz room node, and thankfully that's one of the only
had-
ones that bothers me.
Yeah.
But I'll check it on all these different sources,
Exactly.
and then I just know that, okay, well, if there's a slight problem still, mastering will save it.
That's one question because this is exactly what I do too. In my room, I had it at 90, which is
Oh, okay.
very annoying. And
Nice.
the solution to something like that is, and then I'm gonna ask you something about the rooms. The solution to that is just listening to different media, different places, and different perspective to see.
If
you
it's
know.
beyond correction.
Yeah, of course.
So for me to correct my bump at 70 hertz, I'm sorry, it's actually a dip at 70 hertz, I would have to put something physical trap-wise
Same here.
in the middle of the room.
Same here.
And I wouldn't have a place to sit. I mean, my room goes all the way to 20 hertz, which is
I
awesome.
heard that.
Well, there
And
comes to a point where you have to like compensate for it all,
Exactly.
and you have to be practical about it. Let's face it, the most perfect rooms you can't always afford because of budget,
Yeah.
or you can't always afford because, like in your case, putting something in the middle of the room
Yeah. It's
kind
just
of takes up a lot
Yeah.
of space that prevents you from getting any work done.
Right.
So there comes to a point where you just go, you know what, this is good enough, this is close enough.
I will learn
can,
my room.
This is
and
what
my
this is what I can correct. This is what I can't correct. Years ago at a studio I used to work for, we had just put in a new console, and when we put in that new SSL, they had left one of the conduit pipes open by accident, and for over a year there was a 200 hertz bump
Oh my
right
God.
at the mix position.
Nice,
on
nice
the console.
frequency range too.
Yeah, a
Like,
nice little
man.
200 hertz bump, and for over a year it sat that way
Oh
because nobody knew. And all the engineers that rolled through there were just like, oh, the room just must sound this way, and this is this, and we'll just work around it and all this stuff.
Well, yeah, you compensate.
So finally one day it was just like, we called the owner came down, and we spent a week tuning the room out because he knows acoustics really well. And when we found the conduit pipe that was open on one end and not the other, it was giving a 200 hertz resonance, or between 150 to 200 hertz, because it's like blowing on a bottle
Yeah.
with enough energy. And it's like, oh, we'll just plug the hole up.
Jeez.
And it went away. Now, it sat that way for a year and a half, about a year and a half,
And records.
you get engineers, they come into a room because they're freelance engineers, and they just go, oh, the room just sounds this way, we'll work around it.
Yeah.
Bob knowing his room as well as he does is a great throwback to how things used to be,
Yeah.
in the fact that staff engineers knew the rooms, where they were at, they knew what was good, what was bad, what didn't work, so for us nowadays, and not to pull the whole history lesson, you get engineers walking in a room they may or may not have worked in before, and they're expected to make it sound like $1 million, with or without the gear, with or without anything. They're dealing with an assistant they may or may not have worked before. You don't know, worked with before. You don't know if the assistant knows what he's doing, if he doesn't know what he's doing.
Yeah.
Right.
It's a crapshoot. And then you're dealing with things like coffee, where it's like, I don't even know if the coffee tastes the way it's supposed to taste.
Yeah.
You're expected to work in these environments and make these things happen.
And one thing that I've did a couple of videos on that
Right.
is no matter what monitor system you have and what room you are, you as a mix engineer or a master engineer, you need to take the time to learn your monitoring system and how your room, because, and this was my question for you.
Okay.
There's no such a thing as a perfect room or a perfect monitoring system, right?
Well,
I mean,
they're define perfection. Perfection's boring.
exactly.
Even
if let's
do
put
you
it,
look at
let's
the
put-
Mona Lisa because it's perfect?
No,
Or do you look
absolutely.
at a Picasso because it's perfect?
All right, I'll put it this way. Let's say, can we achieve perfect flat line 20 to 20?
Oh yeah, you
20K?
can.
And
There's a studio in Nashville, and I don't want to mention names because I'm not going to throw anybody under the rug
Yeah.
because I'm not. It's a great studio. They spent over $5 million to build the place. It's a single tracking room. When they built it, the studio designer went beyond all out to give you the most perfect recording environment and perfect control room environment.
okay,
To the point where there's bass traps everywhere to make all
Yeah.
the frequencies perfect. It sounds amazing, but for a long time they had trouble booking the place because, well, amazing's not what people want.
okay. This was
know,
the sequel.
Yeah.
Does let's take this room as an example.
It's a great room.
That's a very no this like the one you were talking about.
Okay.
This is amazing.
Sure.
It's been here like
I guarantee you I know the
it's amazing.
I'm sure you do.
But
yeah.
will this 20K flat line
Uh-huh.
translate in the outside world? Like working in such an environment, it will actually have benefits?
It does in some respect, and it doesn't in other respects. If you don't know the room, it's just going to sound weird.
Exactly, that was my
And
point.
it's just going to feel funny to you. If you know the room, whether it's flat or not, music's not flat. Not every instrument has the same frequency response, and harmonic response in the harmonic series. None of it is flat. The world's not flat.
So even
you know,
even if we assume we are entering a perfect room,
yeah.
by definition we said before, you still have to learn it.
Oh, of course. Well, even the best of acoustic spaces
Exactly.
have
But that's
their, you know,
That's important
caveats.
to say, because you know people usually what they do is like they keep buying new monitor, better monitor, and they don't give themselves the time to learn how they translate. It
Well,
doesn't
it's-
matter how much money
Well,
you
and
throw at
monitors-
Well,
monitors.
it's diminished returns at that point, because
Yeah.
no matter how much money you spend on anything, there comes to a point where it's going to plateau, and
Thank God.
anything beyond that, you're maybe looking at a 1 to 2% difference. And if that's worth the money to you, then absolutely. And yeah, you can say, I swapped out my monitors and got better mixes. Well, why? Is it because you bought new monitors? Is it because you think you're getting better mixes? Or is it because it's something that can be measured? You know, regardless of who makes the speakers, they all react differently in different spaces. And it's such a phenomenon that I can take these speakers, and if I were to go to my place, for example, I'd be like, I don't know about these.
Yeah,
or
yeah, yeah.
maybe I go, wow, these things are really awesome.
It's the same thing we were saying in our first improvised tour with the mic.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You know, the environment in which you put a source, in this case could be a vocal, it could be a human voice, or it could be a speaker.
Yeah.
It's part of the sound itself.
Yeah, we've had, there's a very popular set of speakers out right now, powered monitors, $8,000 they cost, and they sound beautiful, but they don't work in our rooms.
Okay.
And I've tried them 3 times now,
Yeah. Yeah.
Uh-oh.
and they just don't work in our rooms. Other rooms I've heard them, they're great. And my last studio, I had a pair of monitors, and I was so excited. I spent $5,000 on them. I got cases so I could carry them around and protect them, and I could not get them to sound good, even
Wow.
with their EQ adjustments in my room. Took them to a producer's house. They sounded awesome. I
Yeah.
sold them to him.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You know, they didn't work in that room.
Yeah.
You know?
Hey, hold on. I got a question on this
Sure.
thing Joe's talking about. This flat room.
Yeah.
Is the issue, if I go in there to record, I'm not going to get the feedback, the vibe that I need?
That's part of it.
It's very sterile.
Yeah.
I had
It's great to be in a sterile environment if you know the environment is sterile. But like anything else, you got to learn the room.
Yeah.
And, you know, for us, like on my side where I do mostly tracking, you know, and Bob's lucky he has a mix room. He gets to come in the same room all the time. He knows all the pitfalls, all the blessings, etc. that the room's going to be. Same thing with Mayor. He's got his mastering suite. He knows what's going to happen in that room all the time. For guys like myself, where we do a lot more tracking and have to move around a lot, you know, there's certain studios I pick out for certain things because they do certain things related to the art and the artistry that is this whole process. You know, most of the time, like with people picking rooms, they're not sitting there going, well, that room's got this piece of gear in it, so I have to go record there. In LA or in New York or even in Nashville, there's places I can rent all kinds of gear that if I need something specific, I can probably rent it.
Yeah.
So I'm not picking a studio because of gear, you know. So then what's the next thing down the list? Well, the room sounds nice. This is a really good room for doing drums, so that's cool. We'll go to this place for this and go to that place for that. In getting back to your question about being in a completely sterile environment, you got to learn the room like any other room. Because now that you know that everything's as flat as it possibly can be, what you get is what you get.
Yeah.
So if something's lacking, then we need to figure out where it's lacking, why it's lacking, and correct that.
And we're back. Mauer Applebaum had to leave. He had work to do. For you, what are some myths? No, what's the biggest myth for you for mixing?
For me is definitely the loudness is all in mastering stage. This is what people tend to think that is all about the mastering stage, how loud a mix can be, how far you can push it. When your mix is finished, it has to have the potential to be loud and not sounds like shit, you know, because loud, it's easy. Loud that sounds good is not easy. You have to give the mastering engineer something that he can work on where he doesn't have to limit 10, 12 dB. But, you know, the mix, the right mix is a mix that has a good crest factor where already the RMS level is good enough so that the mastering engineer can do very little processing. That should be the purpose of mastering, to do minor adjustments, not to, fix a mess of a mix and then, try to make it sound loud. A good crest factor is key to then have a good sounding loud master. How balanced first, because any kind of unbalance is going to be the ceiling for the master engineer when you actually go to limit, whether you use one limiter, 3 clipping converters, soft clipping in the box. Limiting is one of the stages of mastering to bring the mix to a commercial level, let's call it this way. Any unbalance is going to be a ceiling. If you have too much low end, that's going to fart when you go limit, the mix. And same for the high end, too much high end, too much mid content, it's gonna sound harsh. It's gonna start, falling apart. So balance is the first thing, and the second thing is on how to achieve a good crest factor, so a potentially loud mix. Is just to do it, to limit and compress and do a bunch of operation and processing step by step. Not leave it at the end of like your 2-bus or at the mastering stage, even worse. So even putting a lot of stuff on your 2-bus to try to fix what you didn't do on single tracks and on groups, I think it's wrong. It's not the right way. So it's a process, and I feel like this comes from people wanting an easy fix to achieve a good mix. There's not an easy fix,
Well, yeah, everybody is looking for the best brick wall limiter, the most transparent, the newest one that has oversampling, the most oversampling. And while every percentage that stuff gets better will help you to be more transparent, like you said, you really got to prep the mix to be loud.
Exactly.
I learned that. I had one of my first big releases, mix-wise. I had 3 songs on the album, and all mine were quieter than the others. There's like 6 mixers on this one project. And me and one other guy, our mixes were quiet, but same mastering guy, same mastering session, and all the others were louder. And he had gotten ours as loud as he could, but the other engineers, he could get theirs louder because they prepped the tracks. They limited their kicks individually or balanced them better, and now we have all these tools. It should be easier to get louder mixes, but people just use them in the wrong way, or they put it all on the stereo bus, And I don't use brick wall limiters on my stereo bus, but I will use them on individual instruments.
Same here.
Yeah.
I would limit, and people sometimes I notice a lot of my subscribers until I pointed this out that I was using limiting on single tracks.
Yeah.
And no brick wall limiting on my 2-bus. They were somehow afraid to use limiting on single tracks, or they weren't thinking even that was a thing, because in their head, and I'm talking about, of course, not experienced engineer who was starting, they were thinking just the brick wall limiting was to be left to the mastering stage, and you couldn't touch it.
It's the last thing.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
It's just not true. They are actually extremely useful tools for single tracks. Well,
I think it really helps a lot to have an end goal in mind and have an end vision in mind.
Definitely.
So if you need a loud record, because let's face it, when it comes to being in the marketplace, you're in competition with every other record that's in that genre, with every other artist that's in that genre. And unfortunately, we've turned into a society where if it's louder, it's appeared to be better.
Yep.
And you can A/B 2 albums and have a volume difference between, or like A/B the same album, and one being slightly louder, and everyone's going, oh, I like that version better because it's slightly louder. We've hit that point where we're trying to cram as much information as far as frequency response, as far as dynamics, into a recording, whether it's an MP3, whether it's a WAV file, whether it's a CD. There's only so much you can do, and there's only so much you can't do. And I think that if you really want a loud record, you have to have that in mind from the get-go. Because there's going to be certain techniques that you do when you're tracking, and this is getting back to some of the other things that we've talked about before, where you have a real tracking engineer. You know, it's a lot different working with a real tracking engineer than just somebody who's like, well, I also mixed the record and did this and did that.
Yeah, I just make
You
sure I
know,
don't
so
click.
having somebody who understands from the bottom, the foundation, that this is what the end result's going to be, okay, you can prepare for that and you can set things up for that.
Absolutely.
And then by the time it gets to the mix stage where you're mixing the record, you're like, okay, well, I need it to do this because I needed to do this and need to do that. We did this in tracking, so I now can make this a lot easier to do. And then by the time it gets to the mastering guy or your mastering engineer, it's like, great, we can make a loud record.
Yeah, exactly.
You know?
This is something a bit that I explained in that video is even if you have to mix with loudness in mind. That was my concept. Yeah, you need to know. Okay, I know this artist, this project has to compete in that, bracket, in that niche, and that's the standard. So you mix with that in mind. So you make sure you deliver to the master engineer a mix that has the potential. Otherwise, the master engineer you're gonna have a bad day. And the mix is, like you said before, your testimony was very important. The same master engineer given two mixes, one can get to a certain level, and the other one it doesn't, or it will fall apart.
You have to address it moment by moment in a mix as well. Like you could have a verse with just drums, no bass, and get a certain amount of loudness, and then in the pre-chorus the bass comes in, and certain notes are fine, but other notes, the kick and the bass, and maybe one other synth sound stack up on top of each other, and get you 3 dB over, but the rest of the whole part, it's 3 dB less. So you have one note that's causing you a loss of 3 dB in the end.
Exactly.
And you might have to address just that one little area rather than an overall EQ or overall balance.
Absolutely.
You might just have to change that one moment.
Yeah. And this makes me think about arrangement. That is also a very important factor. Like the arrangement also plays a role in how loud it can be. The pattern the drums plays, the BPM, and how the bass and the drums. I talk about bass and drums because those we know all that
they're the core.
And impact too.
Yeah,
and
exactly.
Energy.
And there's a lot of energy in the low end, and those two elements, if they are not arranged properly, first of all, the mix is going to be a nightmare for us. And the potential for the mix to be loud is just going to be lower than if
That's funny. Like for the hip hop guys out there, listen to the stuff that we regard as well mixed and the stuff that has some of the biggest fame. Just take Drake. Yeah, he's got songs with 808s, and then he has a song with kick drums. Sometimes there might be an 808 with a kick built in. But a lot of times it's just an 808 or the kick is in the back and the 808's on top. And I see so many producers where they're like, I want a big 808 and a big kick.
No.
And, and a big synth bass on top of the 808 because they're considering the 808 as a drum, not a synth.
Yeah.
So they also do a bass. And now you have these low frequencies take up the most energy, meaning volume, meaning headroom.
Yeah.
So the bigger your bass is, the quicker you run out of room to make things loud. So if that's why I always stress to new producers, the less is more thing. It's like have an awesome kick, and then when you get to the chorus, have an awesome 808 and turn the kick down. You know, it's like make it work, make it cool. Yeah. Like some are like, well, if I don't have the kick and I just have an 808, it's not cool. Like find a way to make it cool.
Yeah, find a way.
We
to
have
make
less
it cool.
limitations nowadays too.
Yeah.
In the early days, and I like to stress a lot of this audio history stuff, but like in the early days. Most studios would start you off in what was then the mastering suite, which really wasn't mastering. It was just transferring from tapes to vinyl. And you started off there before you did anything else because you needed to know what you could fit on that vinyl disc.
Physically.
Physically.
Yeah.
How much information can you squeeze onto there before you run into problems, before you run into this and that?
What the problem would be?
Well, for example, too much bass.
What happens?
Your needle can jump off the record. It won't play. Depending on how long your songs are, depending on how much dynamic range you want in a song, determines how many songs you can fit on that vinyl disc as well per side, because you only get X amount of minutes.
The high end goes down, if I don't remember wrong, as you go toward the center, right?
Yeah, correct. And these are all things that we used to deal with a lot because that was the final format. Nowadays, there's less limitations in those respects, but they've created other limitations because we now have to compete with, I have 2 kick drums, 2 808s, whatever, and a bass synth on a track. Because, hey, the producer likes it and it sounds good, but it doesn't always work for mixing and it doesn't always work for mastering. So we've still have the limitations we used to have. It's just that they've changed what they used to be. And now they're different limitations. So how this all ties into with loudness, it's like, well, okay, how much louder do I need it to be? What can I do to get there? Why do I need to get it there? These are all things that we all have to think about.
Two questions.
Go ahead.
2 questions. One is like, do you find that, because I do, it's a lot easier and they usually end up sounding louder, the mixes that are somewhat more minimal in the arrangement.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Like that's think of this concept. So instead of technical, just take your 2 bus meters, your final master fader meters. You got a left and you got a right. You have down here is all the way off. Up here is as loud as you can get. And think about, you have 4 tracks for a whole song: kick, bass, piano, and a vocal. And you get to pour all that into the stereo meter and fill it up with those 4 sounds.
They're big.
Now take 200 sounds. Now you got to start pulling them down. And now you're clipping, so now you got to pull them down more. Yeah. Now all of a sudden you got all your sounds quieter and smaller, more compressed, more just squeezed in to fill up that whole 2 bus.
Yeah.
And that's technically that's not the right way to think about it, but it
it's
makes,
for the people.
It's the
we
easiest
know
way to
philosophical sense. But
exactly.
it's not old guys saying the days of when we were limited to 24 tracks was better and those records sound better. I love the way some modern records sound.
Me too.
I think we have the best tools to make records.
We do.
The concept of having unlimited tracks, if you're not mature enough to listen as you're creating and keep, like I see so many people where they'll play a synth part on a song they're producing, and then they kind of forget about it because now they hear a new melody in their head of another piano part. Like, I didn't put that piano. And that melody works, and that melody works. Okay, now I hear a bass line, and that bass line is technically a moving melody. Cool, and I got that. And they stop listening to what they've done 5 minutes ago. It's like,
just
you know what?
you can,
an organ fits in here.
Yeah.
Just because it can doesn't mean you should put it.
Yeah, exactly.
It's like pick apart the big songs out there. Like one of my favorites is because I actually got to see the multi-track, was Just Dance by Lady Gaga.
Yeah.
I didn't work on the album version. I worked on Dancing with the Stars when she did her live performance. Mm-hmm. So I got to see that multi-track. It's so small, and that song sounds so
gigantic.
Big. And Rob Orton did a great job mixing it, but he also had just a few elements to make each of those few elements huge.
Yeah, exactly.
And not have to compete with 50 freaking synths.
That is my thing too.
Guitars, like too many guitars is another one. It's like you start having 14 guitars all playing at the same time.
Well, there gets to a point where it's like you double it and it sounds bigger, and then the moment you get after that, it starts to sound thinner and thinner and thinner and thinner.
Right. Smears and it's all messed. And the same thing with kicks for hip hop and trap producers. Yeah. I see some producers stacking seriously 8 to 10, 9, 12 kicks.
Yeah.
Right. And at some point, we know better that those kicks are gonna have some phase interaction between them. Yeah. They're gonna start canceling out until they end up with a sound that they could have had with 2 kicks.
So another artistic way for people to think non-technically about that, you're working in DAWs, you get to see the wave of a kick.
Yeah.
You get 4 kicks in there, zoom in on them and look at the wave and picture that when that wave goes up, the woofer's pushing out. When that wave goes down, the woofer's coming back to resting point. Now look at the kick below that. If they're going like this, you got the woofer pushing and pulling at the same time. It's not going to be punchy.
Yeah, no, it's not.
So if you're going to layer kicks, there's an art to layering kicks,
Absolutely.
Getting them in phase, getting, and sometimes it's hard to get the entire signal to totally go up and down.
Yeah,
if it did, it would be the same kick sound.
Yeah, when stacking kicks, we can use, and we do use, phase cancellation as a form of EQ.
Sure.
But that's sound designing.
That's advanced.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. That's advanced. My problem is what we said before. Just people start adding up.
Right.
Shit.
Well, and you got to remember when you combine a kick with an 808, same problem.
Exactly.
The low end of a synth, same problem. You have waves pushing and pulling, and that's why if there was, I know there's attempts and there's different software out there to completely align sounds with phase. But there's an art when you're picking your sounds, making them work together.
This is important because one thing, even when recording guitars with 2 or 3 microphones, perfect phase is not necessarily the best sound.
Right.
You agree that maybe, if you pull even half an inch, you get the cancellation, let's say at 6K, where is actually, the rat frequency when it scratches.
Yeah.
So it's like perfect phase is not necessarily the best sound, especially in a context of a mix.
Right.
So you can, but there's an art.
Being armed with that knowledge, when you're going, it's like people hand me a mix, like, man, I really want the drums to hit. For one, why even say that? That's what's going to happen. That's the idea.
Of course, that's assumed.
But then I go in and look at their tracks, and they have 4 kicks that counteract each other, and purposely it makes it so it doesn't hit.
Yeah.
Mute 2 of them. All right, now we're in the game. But then they're like, well, where's my 3rd and 4th kick?
Just
you said you wanted it to hit. Do you want it to hit, or do you not want it to hit?
Just listen to how it sounds. Don't look at it.
They're mixing with their eyes and not with their ears.
Exactly.
Because they're sitting there going, hey, I saw you mute my 2 kick drums.
But how does it sound? Just don't look at. Nobody's gonna see your mix or see your kicks in solo. That's another big thing. That I see people tend to do today. They solo way too much, and they spend maybe the first hour and a half on their kick.
Yeah.
Wow, it's perfect. It's a diamond, and then they open the mix up, and it sounds like shit because they didn't mix in context.
Right.
Well, it's like one of the biggest tricks I learned a long time ago was if you want like bigger bass, pick which gets the low end, the kick drum or the bass. Rock, pop, country, whatever. Go on and on and on.
Yeah.
One gets the low end, one gets the mid range. And that's how you get the separation between the two. That's how you get bigger sounding bass guitars and all this stuff. And some of my best work, I didn't boost the low end on the bass. I boosted the mid range because it cut through. And everyone going, wow, your bass sounds great. It's like, well, yeah, because it's not fighting with the kick drum.
I'm a big advocate of the 900 or 1K on bass because my bass is like bark like that. Unless, don't fit in the song, but usually I mix rock, so it's like that's my thing. But I've always been a big advocate. Actually, the API 500, the 550B is like my favorite mid band for bass for that bark. I think it's 900 or 1K, something like that.
I'll be devil's advocate now and play on the other side because of our limitations and the growth of home recording, home producing. Sometimes guys aren't in a room where they can hear cancellations as well, or they just don't have a good monitoring environment, and they just hear 2 drums making it sound like it has more energy somehow.
Yeah.
So it's better, and that's why.
Getting back to what you said about the woofer coming out and coming back in.
Yeah.
I mean, the reality is the woofer as a physical medium, as a physical moving object, there's only going to be so far it throws out. That's it. And anything beyond that, it's not happening. And if you really push it too hard, you'll break the woofer altogether. So they're always in a constant fight with everything. Regardless of however many number of kick drums we put on a record or however many number of bass tracks, it's a constant balancing act.
Yeah.
And it takes a long time to get good at that constant juggling and balancing act that we have to do.
And it's not one thing. People always ask me, what do I do with my kick and bass? It's not one thing. First of all, it changes every time. And then is probably 10 different decisions.
Yeah.
One is a cue, one is where one ends and the other starts. Dynamics plays a role. Maybe you want to kick, maybe you want to sidechain, maybe not. Depending on, maybe you want to surf a cue, maybe not. So I want this, to pass as a message. There's not one trick for kick and bass.
There's not one trick for anything.
Yeah, exactly. This I would say we can introduce the subject for the next roundtable.
Yeah.
Which is loudness and loudness war, which we were supposed to touch on today, but we enjoy the conversation.
Of course.
So there's gonna be more. There's gonna be more episode. And,
every time we start talking about loudness, see, I like mixing for loudness. And every time there is such a war that starts, and people act like we're not supposed to mix for loud, but there are things when I mix for loud that the emotion, the feeling, there's a feeling that I get. Like I was sitting in my SUV, right, and I'm listening to a Dr. Dre song. It's called The Watcher.
Yeah.
And I'm comparing that to Dangerous of Michael Jackson.
Mm-hmm.
So you got Bruce Wooding
Yeah.
and Dr. Dre. And it's two different things. One of them, like Bruce and them, they talk about these transients.
Yeah.
Bruce's stuff, that stuff was coming at me. It's like it would come at me,
It's
but then it would
dynamic,
stop.
yeah.
There's things that were actually coming at me, and I can feel it, and there was an emotional thing from that. Dr. Dre's wasn't doing that, and it felt different, and I loved it. But I loved Michael Jackson's thing. And I'm sitting there like, hold on, man. Both of these things are the truth. They were two total different experiences.
Yeah.
But both of them sounded good, felt good. No, both of them sounded great, felt great, and they were two total different beasts.
Yeah.
Well, that's the artistry behind it all, though.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that's when you're no longer thinking of the technical. It's about the art
Yeah.
and the art form.
That's why
And
I
what
always.
works for Dre on that particular track or any other track he's done fits the art form
Yeah.
and fits what he does. And there's a reason you'd hire Dre to produce. Like, would you hire Dre to produce Dangerous? I don't think so.
No.
Because it'd be a completely different thing than
Yeah.
what Bruce Swedien did as a mix engineer.
Yeah.
You know, as a tracking engineer. You know,
Question.
wasn't that Rodney Jerkins who did Darkchild, who did Dangerous?
I don't remember.
Teddy Riley.
Oh, okay. Well, I know Rodney did some stuff with Michael at some point. That's why he was the first to come up.
Do you
but-
think certain songs just objectively sound better louder?
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, because I think that too.
Well,
and
it
plenty
brings the
sound worse.
emotional response.
Yeah, sorry. And in the opposite side, do you feel like some tracks just don't benefit?
Yeah, no, I mean, absolutely. Like, there's the louder you are, the more unrelenting the sound is. The more it's just kind of beating you to death.
Yeah.
And that's why EDM songs they're all loud and they work loud.
Yeah.
You know, and then you take a Michael Bublé song,
Exactly.
you give it the same RMS.
It would be stupid.
It's
it
not
would
gonna
feel
be,
wrong. It would
It's not gonna be
definitely
good.
feel wrong.
You're
Yeah.
not gonna enjoy it.
I'm saying this because I'm kind of somewhat known for loud
Yeah.
masters, and especially because of the genre I work
Right.
mainly into.
A lot of rock stuff, in my opinion, allows war it's less of a war. I mean,
Yeah.
of course, there's finite amounts, but rock stuff is generally louder by
Yeah.
nature because drums, traditionally, and not everybody. I mean, when I mix rock, my drums are way too loud, probably to a lot of people, but most rock mixers mix drums a little back,
No, I don't.
and the guitar is really ahead.
I'm like you. I mix drums up
Yeah,
front.
but so they're already loud. They've always been loud.
Yeah.
You know, like Chris Lord-Alge's stuff is just as loud as it was 10 years ago, probably, or
Yeah.
at least close.
Yeah.
He's always gotten stuff loud, you know. But in the more urban and pop world, it's more of a struggle because drums are louder, low end is bigger.
And more like you said, with electric guitars, you already have a signal that has in
limited.
itself a high RMS level and a good crest factor. It's just pretty much the distortion limits itself, the signal. So it's kind of, you already have a lot of harmonic content in the raw tracks. So
That was one great thing about the SSL when you're talking about Dr. Dre, is all those transients hitting that analog circuitry and getting louder without even thinking of loudness. It's just you're just pushing a console and it's getting louder because the transients are getting shaved off by the circuitry. Where Bruce Swedien's probably a little more of an elegant approach. Things are lower and they take baby steps of getting loudness with.
That's how I use my two Neves, the tape saturator.
Yeah.
For that, just shave off. They have a when you remember what I told you, like my sweet spot is when the first yellow lights up. That's when the soft clipper starts.
Right.
So I make sure there's like a couple occasional, peaks are hitting that yellow light, and the soft clipping is getting there, and it's just taming the nominal level.
Yeah.
But you perceive it louder because
That's
there's a
another
little bit of
lesson
distortion.
that we could talk on next time, is that little by little, making your song louder
Yes.
is always going to be better than one plug-in at the end
Yes.
trying to do all that work.
Absolutely, definitely.
Yeah.
And to close this up, the amount of low end limits the potential for loudness, doesn't it? there's a compromise. Like if
Technically, absolutely. I mean, I just finished an album, this group called The Siege, and the 808s are louder than the lead vocals, and it's killing, and it's mastered loud. But I took all day on every song to get it to be perceived louder.
Yeah,
and plenty of room in the 808, and I was tucking frequencies that I could get away with tucking, and it still seems like it's all there. But I pulled out a big part of the energy that let me push the fader up 3 more dB. And it's not something that you can just say, hey, always do this on an 808.
That's no way.
I think the big rule of thumb with any of that stuff is there's always going to be trade-offs.
Yeah.
And
there's always a compromise.
In order to take care of one thing, you have to give up something else. You know, what is it? Science says you can't create energy or destroy energy. It just changes form. Everything's a trade-off. Yeah. You know, so if you want the really big 808 kicks, great. What are you giving up in favor of that?
Yeah.
You know,
we just got a track back mastered, and you know, my assistant CD pointed out that while the mastering had maybe a slightly nicer EQ, it lost the groove because the elements had been squeezed a little.
Yeah.
And it was only a couple dB louder than my mix, but that 2 dB less on my mix had a better feel to him. And I agreed when I listened to it, you know, but it's like, so what do you go if? Do you need the loudness? And so what I did was I called the mastering engineer, and I basically made a compromise. Give me in between. Yeah. In between my mix and your master, that level. So maybe we can retain some of the groove that way. Because mine was just a little too low, and his EQ was really nice. So we kind of made a compromise. But his first master was really a compromise. Yeah. So
you didn't. This is the message, I think. Don't sacrifice quality, as in good sounding, for loudness, or at least sacrifice it up to a certain level. You know. Yeah. There has to be.
In the end, we're doing music, and it has to create an emotion. It has to feel good.
You're selling feelings.
Yeah, exactly.
If you're doing a dance groove and you pull all the feeling out because you got it loud, what was the point?
Yeah,
no one wants to dance to it anymore.
I think this is a great point to end this up. You want to take us home?
This was our first episode of the MixbusTV Roundtable. What are we going to continue with?
I think next time we're gonna talk about a little more loudness, how to achieve it, how Bob said, stages instead of putting all in one place, putting all the limited on one stage. That's going to be our starting point.
It'd be great if kind of pull some of the topics for next time off of comments from people that watch.
Absolutely. Cool. So definitely.
Okay.
You guys comment down below. Tell us what you want us to talk about and suggest next subject, and we're gonna get them down.
Yeah, right on.
This is our first Mixbus Roundtable. Thanks to Joe Vazzetti, Mauer Applebaum, who had to go work, Bob Horn, mix engineer. I called him Mr. Metal Man, basically. But you're a mixer, producer.
I'm mainly a mix and mastering
artist.
Engineer. I was an artist. Yeah, and I happen to have a YouTube channel. But my main job is mix and mastering. And so right now that I'm in LA, I'm actually producing Sammy Dahl, which is keyboard player for AMX, and she has a band called Bullet High. We're gonna start production soon, and we are actually, at this point, I say we are actually producing Diesel, the rap artist that we have recorded a few days ago.
Diesel's my favorite rapper from my hometown, Fresno. So David Nazi, my idol Tep, MixbusTV, we're out.